I'm a great defender of cholesterol. It is a molecule of life.
Now, he said a lot of things on this podcast that were incorrect. The Diary of a CEO guy and some of these other podcasts, they seem to like they just want to platform anyone rather than getting an actual insulin expert, like an actual endocrinologist who treats thousands of people a year.
Is talking about insulin resistance really more important than talking about cholesterol now? Hi, I'm Dr. Eric Westman, and welcome to my channel where I review and debunk nutritional misinformation online. In this video, we're going to see a clash of the paradigms. The old paradigm of cholesterol and the new paradigm of cholesterol and metabolic syndrome. It's pretty interesting, although we're going to hear lots of name calling and kind of ranting that I don't know why that happens, but let's see. Be sure to wait till the end of the video where you hear my final thoughts. Before we get started on today's video, I wanted to personally invite you to join me in the next 3-week Keto Made Simple program, which is opening for enrollment on May 1st. I call it Keto Made Simple because it's exactly that. You don't have to calculate macros, you don't need to measure ketones, you don't have to weigh and measure your food, and you don't need to do any fasting. You'll learn the exact same proven method that I use with my patients. This is the last time the program will include 3 weeks of support with me and my team, so join the waitlist now to guarantee your spot. See the link in the description.
I'm a great defender of cholesterol. It is a molecule of life.
All right, where to start? So this is Benjamin Bikman, who is on the Diary of a CEO podcast, talking about cholesterol. Now, he said a lot of things on this podcast that were incorrect, but I'm going to address the cholesterol ones because obviously that's my area of expertise. Those of you who don't know me, I'm Dr. Al. I'm a double board certified cardiologist, and I spend most of my time educating people online about cholesterol and the dangers of heart disease and how to prevent it.
Yeah, so always consider the source. This video, I've watched Dr. Allo before, and he is staunchly, firmly cemented in the old paradigm. And this is a really important video if you're having to deal with family members, doctors who are in that old paradigm. Ben Bikman, who is one of the, upcoming keto-friendly insulin resistance scientists, basic scientists who can actually test a lot of these ideas in animals or in vitro models, has a lot of really good things to say. And so I'm a little bit taken aback that Dr. Allo wouldn't go along with what Ben said, but let's get more detail here.
So he talks about a lot of things, and these podcast people, you know, like the Diary of a CEO guy and some of these other podcasts, they seem to like they just want to platform anyone rather than getting an actual insulin expert, like an actual endocrinologist who treats thousands of people a year. They bring on these social media influencers who are not physicians, who don't treat patients, but have published books or have a large online following. And mind you, the book that he's published called Why We Get Sick, he tries to blame everything on insulin resistance when literally like 9% of the population has insulin resistance, but 70 to 80% are overweight. So, that makes no sense. But he tries to blame everything on insulin resistance, and that's why we get sick. The book was reviewed by Red Pen Reviews, and the Red Pen Reviews said it is only about 45% accurate, scientifically accurate. And I'll put the screen grabs there. The only book that was less accurate were two of them. One of them is the Obesity Code, Dr. Jason Fung's book, which I just did a review and a reaction video to his appearance on the Dr. Mike show. His book is less accurate, called The Obesity Code or something like that, which is also along these same lines, these people who are anti-carbs and think everything is an insulin problem. And the only other book that was worse than both of those is Carnivore MD. The Carnivore MD's book was ranked the least scientifically accurate, and I'll put that up here too.
Well, let's stop there for a moment. A lot to unpack there. I don't know the exact formula that this mechanism is using to rate the scientific accuracy, but I bet it's based on the old paradigm. So, that's a bit like having an Olympics where the only judges are from one country. And of course, that country's skater is going to win, right? So you stack the panel. I've seen that done, and I've participated in panels where it's stacked against keto and low carb diets. So the U.S. World and News Report summary about best diets, I was on that panel a few times, and I dropped out because they really weren't being fair, and they weren't being transparent. That's really what I wanted, but they wouldn't do it. So when you say it's not scientific, I'm thinking that it's not old paradigm. So it's not, it's something new. And well, that might actually be something that you're interested in, because perhaps your endocrinologist hasn't been able to fix you, hasn't been able to reverse your diabetes, maybe didn't even think about talking about reversing your diabetes. I have that happen in my clinic pretty much every week, where the dietitian or the diabetologist or the other doctors say that you're going to have diabetes forever. So I'm not sure that Dr. Allo is correct here in saying you want to get someone who is in the old paradigm to be interviewed. In fact, Ben Bikman is not just an influencer, and he's come to speak at meetings that I've been to, and he actually is a scientist. So I'm afraid Dr. Allo didn't get that quite right. There are some hucksters out there who have no lab, no science behind what they're doing. And the neat thing about Dr. Ben Bikman is he can come to a meeting and we talk about something, and then he can go back to his lab and test it, refute it, or verify it, which is pretty nice to have that interactivity.
And the funny thing is, Carnivore MD has decided he's no longer Carnivore MD. He's like, you know what? I was wrong. Keto is a terrible diet. He was on the More Plates, More Dates podcast with, I forget the guy's name, but he was on that podcast about a year ago, and he decided and stated that keto is a terrible idea and no one really should do it. And I was getting sick, my testosterone was down, I was fatigued, tired all the time, etc. So this gentleman, Benjamin, is on this podcast, and they bring up the topic of, first of all, there's a lot of topics they brought up. I'm not going to go through all of them because most of it is nonsense. You have someone who literally has no idea what they're doing, talking about topics that they also seem to have no idea what they're doing. And I don't know why this is. One of two things is happening usually. Either you just don't know, and you don't know any better, and you could learn. There's nothing wrong with that if you don't know. The second option is you know, and you are intentionally misleading people. I don't like to get into people's intentions because, I think that's a slippery slope. So let's just assume the guy doesn't know what he's talking about.
Well, of course, this is a bit strange to hear, Dr. Allo, you say that, because Ben Bikman is a scientist who's actually working on these concepts and publishes papers. And so perhaps it's just a new way of looking at things rather than nonsense. I've never heard anyone call Dr. Bikman's work nonsense.
I can teach dumb, but I can't teach lazy. If you are dumb about cardiology and you don't know cardiology, that's why you're here. We are here to teach you cardiology. You're on a cardiology rotation, and we are here to teach you. No problem. If you are open to learning and you want to learn cardiology, come rotate with us, and we will be more than happy to teach you cardiology, how to treat cardiac disease, heart failure, diabetes, hypertension, heart attacks, strokes, how to put in stents, how to put in pacemakers, all of that. We will teach you that.
So this is called an ad hominem, when you talk down the person rather than the point that was being argued. And it's sad, but it's used a lot when there's no point to be debated here. And he's basically calling Ben dumb, which Ben's a lot of things. He's not dumb. So it would be great if actually, Dr. Allo, if you could interview Ben rather than just pan it. And the interesting thing is I teach medical students too, and internal medicine residents at Duke University, and we expose them to just another way to go about things. So again, there's an old paradigm that we're hearing about here, and it's kind of emblematic of the reaction that happens to an old paradigm when a new paradigm comes around. And actually, we're reversing type 2 diabetes and other things that the old paradigm can't do, or does a little bit with medications. But so the ad hominem here, well, you just must be dumb, or no, you must be lazy. No, that was his point, that Ben must be no, he's not lazy.
People like Rhonda Patrick, who's a PhD or a doctor of some sort, they should know better. One of her podcasts, literally, she told people, do not eat bananas and blueberries together because of some bizarre mechanism. It causes something not to be absorbed or something or other. People keep tagging me in those videos. Unfortunately, while that mechanism may be true, we do not have a blueberry undereating problem in the United States or a banana undereating problem. In the United States and all across the world, we don't eat enough fruit and vegetables.
So again, it's a clash of paradigms, and that kind of rant about other influencers that really had nothing to do with Ben's comments, did it?
Go and make all the money you want. There's nothing wrong with that at all. I would support that. I hope you make $1 billion someday. But when you pretend to be a scientist or someone who cares about health and you misinform people, like Gary Brecka, literally every day it's a new piece of nonsense. It's red light tanning beds and saunas and cold plunges and magic wands that you stir your water with and water oxygenators and hydrogenators and all this nonsense that literally has no scientific evidence to back it up. You claim to be someone caring about healthcare and the wellness of people when you're literally selling a bunch of nonsense.
This is an interesting strategy here, really, and I don't know if Dr. Allo knows if he's doing it, but calling something nonsense, first he called Ben Bikman's work nonsense, which it's not. It's actually science, good science, about a different paradigm. But then talking about all these things that I agree are total nonsense or non-scientific. I don't subscribe to or endorse any of those other things he mentioned. I agree it's nonsense. So now, I guess going back to the original Ben Bikman stuff, we're going to say, oh, well, nonsense, because all those other things are nonsense. Well, he really hasn't talked anything yet about what Ben has said.
But literally, he could have gone and interviewed almost any local normal endocrinologist without a following, and he would have known more than his current guest on this topic, which to me is just bizarre. You invite one of the world's least accurate, based on Red Pen reviews, people on a topic where you could have actually invited on a guest that actually is a physician who deals with diabetes and insulin. Literally, he says this doctor tells you insulin something or other. I don't even remember the topic. It's a clickbaity topic. But you could have invited on a guest who's an actual endocrinologist or someone who writes the guidelines for endocrinology and insulin.
So that strategy is called the appeal to authority, where they should have had an endocrinologist or someone of some association, or really we're not talking about what Ben said, but these are all strategies of debate that or trying to distract the argument away from the actual content and talk about other things. And I don't really want to hear what a traditional endocrinologist has to say, except traditional endocrinology is now using medicines that actually can lower blood sugars and make you lose weight. So traditionally, endocrinologists have used insulin, which lowers the blood sugar, but made you gain weight. So some endocrinologists have gotten on to the idea that weight loss is really important for type 2 diabetes reversal, and they are using medicine to do it, which is great. So, but in terms of the cholesterol, we're talking about the old paradigm and new paradigm here, and we haven't even gotten to the content.
You invite this guy whose entire presence online is this clickbaity stuff about how GLP-1s are terrible for you and modern medicine is bad, and it's all about the insulin resistance and all of this, which has been disproven time and time again.
So I disagree with that. I think insulin resistance is if not the most important thing that leads to chronic diseases. It's one of the most important, and it actually is now being linked to things like Alzheimer's disease. And I wouldn't expect Dr. Allo to know that. I've been sitting in conferences where we've been looking at studies done with neurodegenerative disease, and keto is being tested now for those sorts of things. And insulin resistance, it goes on for 20 years before there's a symptom of Alzheimer's. And so he just may not know, or is he lazy? Oh no, sorry, I don't mean to use the same tactics.
Sorry, they found that some of the longest living humans had high cholesterol levels.
That's right. That's what the Sweden study found, for example. The paper just published a year or so ago. What were some of the most consistent themes? They had good glucose control and high cholesterol. I'm a great defender of cholesterol. It is a molecule of life.
So he goes on to talk about this study. He says, we have found that the longest living people in the world are those with the highest cholesterols, which is laughable. He didn't even read the study. He probably read the title. And that's the problem with these people. They don't read the actual studies. I've read the study. There's actually an entire chapter in my book about that exact study. And I actually printed it out. The book is called Cholesterol Truths. I'll put it up here. And the reason I wrote this book is to debunk this kind of nonsense. And it's called Cholesterol Truths because there's too many people that have these cholesterol myths. So Cholesterol Truths is literally trying to debunk all of this nonsense. Another thing he mentions in there is that people with low cholesterol have low testosterone. That's not true at all. There are people born with insanely low cholesterols, like 10, 15, throughout their entire lives, and they have normal testosterone levels. Every study we've done, that we've driven down people's cholesterols to insanely low levels, still have normal testosterone. This is easy to look up, but it doesn't fit his narrative and the nonsense books and stuff that he's trying to sell.
Well, so it's interesting to see the defense of a paradigm, which is then lashing out at and ad hominems and saying that all Ben wants to do is sell books and it's nonsense, when really it is scientific. It's a new type of science that's being discovered. But this goes back to, gosh, a book years ago on scientific revolutions, how there is tension and there's actually controversy when a paradigm is one view that's been dominant for so long, finally has to grapple with the fact that a different paradigm can actually fix things that the old paradigm couldn't. And so the old paradigm says that the cholesterol, the higher it is, the worse it is. And there are lots of studies actually that show that if you're over 70 years old or so, that the higher the cholesterol, the better. And so the narrative, he's calling it a narrative, when really I'll call it a scientific paradigm view, where the paradigm that always lower cholesterol has hit several issues, which is, LDL does not predict the presence of heart disease or the severity of it. That never really has, and yet it's sort of sacred, the LDL. There's a type of LDL, and insulin resistance affects the type, but also the idea that older people with higher cholesterols actually do better. That's been in the literature for a long time, and they're known as the black swans, right? The exception to the rule, which you really have to kind of grapple with, or you can just lash out and say that they're wrong. It's nonsense.
So, with that said, the study that he quotes is the Swedish cohort study, and that should fire off some red flags and warning bells right there. These people in the carnivore, low carb, keto, anti-insulin resistance, whatever crowd, they don't like epidemiological observation.
Well, I guess I'm in that crowd. If you've watched my channel, I've talked about nutritional epidemiology as observational and it's cohort, and it's not hypothesis testing. It's hypothesis generating. However, then there's a new nutritional epidemiology group at McMaster in Canada that's found different results. Actually, they're finding that carbs are bad and fat's fine, when the Harvard group traditionally, and even now will say fat's bad and carbs are okay, not too much of them, but so there are two nutritional epidemiology groups that find different things. Well, it's still all hypothesis generating, which I'm sure Dr. Allo would agree with. And here too, I agree that you don't want to make too much out of a cohort study, but there are people in the other camp, the old paradigm, who use that all the time. And yet it's not right. Two wrongs don't make a right, for sure.
Let's put aside observation studies. I've said this about 1 billion times. When we lower cholesterol, when we lower it, when we do any intervention that lowers it, and it doesn't even matter what that intervention is, you eat only fiber, you exercise like a maniac, you cut out all saturated fat, any dietary intervention or any medical intervention, or even if we do something called a apheresis, where we actually use almost like a dialysis type of machine to suck out all the lipoproteins in your bloodstream. If we do dialysis on you to take out lipoproteins, any intervention, whether it's mechanical like that or a dietary intervention or medications, any intervention that has ever been done, the lower the LDL cholesterol, the less events. Only good stuff happens. Less heart attacks, less strokes, less mortality, less cardiovascular mortality, less all-cause mortality, all of that.
So I'm going to pause on this figure because I go over this figure in great detail in the course that I wrote for Adapt Your Life Academy. You can find it at adaptyourlifeacademy.com. If it's not open, that you can get on the waiting list for it. But basically, when you look at this and in this paper, they say LDL causes heart disease. But in these studies, the best reduction of events is not going to zero. So by the treatments that he's talking about, you don't eliminate risk, you reduce the risk. And that LDL apheresis is fascinating because it's not commonly done, but the initial studies with it, I don't know why it wasn't kept going. There may have been some side effects. It's kind of an onerous thing to go through. But so just because you can take LDL out of the blood, and just because you can give drugs that lower the risk, and here it's not eliminating the risk, it's lowering it. If you want to look at the relative risk versus absolute risk, please look up David Diamond in his talking about the cholesterol medicines that reduce cholesterol levels. So you're not eliminating the risk. And actually this does not prove causality. But the idea here is, okay, what has this view accomplished? Has the cholesterol theory and the LDL theory eliminated heart disease? No, it really hasn't. And you can say, well, people just aren't following the diet well enough or taking the drugs enough. I've seen papers that people aren't taking their drugs. Well, then you have to come up with a better way to do it. Or maybe consider a different approach. So an old paradigm will keep hammering away, and just lash out at a new paradigm. It's time for a study, a randomized trial, prospective experiment with the low-carb keto and the old paradigm where, okay, do a Mediterranean diet, that's fine, plus a medication, and follow these people without heart disease and with existing heart disease over time. Because the status quo of, we don't really emphasize food much but give medication, it has not eliminated the problem. And that's the elephant in the room, I'm afraid.
So he didn't even look at the tables of these people's actual cholesterol levels, which is kind of funny. He claims that people who made it past 100 had higher cholesterol. He didn't even look at the table. So here's the table. And I'll put all this stuff up here. If you look at the supplemental data that was provided, and the study was published, but you had to click on the study to go to the supplemental tables, the supplemental images and graphics and all of that. So these people are just reading these clickbaity titles, barely skimming the title, and the titles are designed to be clickbaity because these journals do also need readers and followers and people to pay for articles. You know, they need to make money too. So just like YouTube videos, they have to have clickbaity titles so you can prop up your podcast and, you know, get clicks. And, you know, that's why they put these people on their podcast so they can get more views and clicks. And
I can't take it anymore. Well, you can see the parent. In fact, Dr. Allo said the people died because high cholesterol causes heart disease. Well, actually in the paper, the older centenarians had better blood glucose control, that even if the total cholesterols were there. And unfortunately, there wasn't the subdivision of the cholesterol levels, which is too bad that it didn't have it. That said, this is a great example of a paradigm clashing. An old paradigm, staunch, even calling new paradigm information nonsense. That's kind of lazy? I don't know. Sorry, Dr. Allo. I don't agree that the cholesterol paradigm has really panned out to reverse heart disease unless you do have extreme reductions perhaps in LDL where the side effects are just, they're outlandish. I mean, so the drug treatment and without regard to the diet may work, but it doesn't totally fix things, and it is becoming so strong and expensive that why don't we try lifestyle change? Potent lifestyle change now, not the other things that some people say can work. you do pilot studies on the best lifestyle changes. Well, that's kind of been done, and keto is definitely one of them. Turns out that in my clinic, I talk about the old paradigm, total and LDL cholesterol, the new paradigm, triglyceride and HDL, and that helps people understand this clash. Often everything looks better, but sometimes the old way doesn't look so good and the new way looks better. All of this leads me to, in a discussion with people in my clinic, to bring up the idea that maybe you need to measure the arteries directly. That's the CAC score, the ultrasounds of the neck and the aorta, to see if you have the disease. Because I've even seen doctors insist that my patients be treated with medicine when they didn't even have atherosclerosis. And that's going too far. That would be like an oncologist, a cancer doctor, saying you need to have this chemo and radiation because you probably have cancer. No, they wouldn't do that. So, interesting video, and I hope it's helpful to see how your doctor or loved ones may respond if you are following this kind of approach. And I hope if you're in the old paradigm that you just open up the idea that maybe there's another way to go about things. If you haven't been to England, they drive on the left-hand side of the road in other countries too. So there may be another approach that works as well. And you don't have to start lambasting at other people that don't think the same way that you do. I hope that's helpful. If you like, please like, subscribe, ring the notification bell, and look for new content on Wednesdays and Fridays. If you enjoyed this video, consider joining our YouTube membership for early access and exclusive live Q&As with me. Just click the join button below or support us with a PayPal in the description.